Good evening. Welcome to the World Tonight. I'm Peter Capote, joined by Adam Lawless, Terrace Burke, and you're coming live from the feature film critics of international politics. And our first topic for today's lovely show is the election occurring as we speak. Yes, there's actually an election as we're speaking. And that is the New Zealand election that is being fought between numerous parties: the Nationals, Labour, New Zealand First, the ACT, Minority, and the Green Party. I'll let Adam explain the context of this New Zealand election.
Okay, so this is leading up to be quite a very unique election for New Zealand, because it's becoming one of the very first times where it looks like a single party is going to be able to beat the more proportional representation oriented mixed member parliament system and actually be able to govern alone. And that's how the polls have been looking and showing the situation. New Zealand's Labour Party, which is currently in government and is led by the Prime Minister, Ardern, she has led a very effective COVID-19 response, and voters are responding with that by supporting her en masse. She's not really polling in any way that would indicate she's going to lose, really. She's been consistently getting above 45% of the vote. And the nearest party to her, the centre-right National Party, is only getting really around 30% of the vote. But before, I just want to ask you, Peter or Taras, who do you think is going to be obviously we can't tell right now because it's still going on, but who do you think is looking out to be the winners and losers of this election?
I think the winner, obviously, besides the obvious Jacinda Ardern, is probably, I think, two other parties. I think if the Greens deny her a majority, they'll just obviously continue their coalition agreement, but this time they will be the main partner of that agreement. So that for themselves might be a victory in the fact that they no longer have to cater to New Zealand First as the lead dog in the coalition. And I think the other winner is the ACT. I mean, they're projected, I think, to have around 8 or 10 seats for a party that's historically usually gets around like 1 or 3. That's really a good result for them. Obviously, maybe a collapse in the right of center vote, but I think those are the two winners besides Labour at the moment. Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going to say probably the same thing, especially with the ACT. It's looking like they're on track for their best result since 1999, 2002, when they had 9 seats in the chamber in the New Zealand Parliament. So, and for them to be, riding quite near that is certainly a good result. And I mean, certainly a blow for the National Party to kind of, after seemingly solidifying the center-right vote, now to have it be very splintered now, it seems like, and really just go from a level of power, it seemed like, for years under Bill Key and John English, and now to be a kind of a weak party almost in the wilderness. So it'll be interesting to see how they come back from.
Yeah. And just to clarify to everyone, ACT is a sort of classical liberal-oriented party formed out of the phrase you may know, Rogenomics, sort of a continuation of that. And yeah, it used to be quite popular when it was first around, but definitely dropped more recently. And just to touch upon the losers, or who's looking like they're going to be the losers, it's really got to be New Zealand First. Now, New Zealand First styles themselves as a sort of populist, kind of centrist economically party. And the real way looking at them is they're usually the kingmaker in any election. So since mixed member proportional has been implemented, National and Labour haven't really ever been able, as I said, haven't been able to get a majority, and so have sort of had to rely upon New Zealand First. But every time they seem to get into a coalition, they seem to completely collapse in the election afterwards. And we've seen this before when they decided to join the Nationals in coalition. But furthermore, they're looking like they're not even going to enter the parliament. Polling is showing that And this, definitely won't be the first time. But who knows how the party will try and orientate itself in the future, because it can't seem like it's going to be the most sustainable way of keeping a party around by just going from election, then rising back again, joining a coalition, collapsing. It's almost like a perpetual cycle for them, really. And then also I'd like to just really call out some of the minor parties which are looking like they're going to be losers in this election as well. I'm talking the Opportunities Party, a bit of a radical centrist. They're looking like they're not going to be really able to consolidate themselves. You also have the Maori Party, who are running in Maori seats, which are just for the Maori population of New Zealand. They're looking like they're going to be outshone by Labour once again. And then you also have Advance New Zealand, which is a very, very strange conspiracy-oriented party that doesn't really believe in the COVID-19. They think it's a conspiracy. And they're not looking like they're going to do particularly well as well. So definitely good for the big two parties, looking like they'll be around. Obviously, New Zealand being the big winner here, and then the traditional smaller parties will be attaching themselves on. But the really small parties aren't looking like they're going to get anywhere in this election.
Yes, exactly. I agree, concur. And I think the interesting thing now will be for the Nationals. Does Judith Collins stay on with a possible election defeat, or does she go as well? Do they have to have their fourth leader in now 1 year?
Yes, exactly. This is the real big thing for the national parties. They're not really an identity crisis, because they've been doing okay in trying to show themselves as a credible party, but people just aren't willing to ditch Labour, because ultimately they've done what they would consider a good job in government, and so they're sticking to it and deciding not to really run on there.
Terrace?
I mean, it's going to be, I think it will be interesting to see certainly how National deals with this. They aren't where they were earlier this year. That is certain to say. Earlier this year, it did look like it was just going to be a complete meltdown. But now it's not looking as bad. So, I mean, a case could be made for Judith Collins to stay on, to continue kind of as a credible opposition against what looks to be a Labour government at this point. Based on the previous polling, we'll see what the actual results say. But I think it would be fair for her to stay on, to at least provide some stability to the National Party leadership, especially having gone through two other leaders previously. So.
Yeah, exactly. I also, just a question to both of you, should Labour fall short and they go into coalition with the Greens, will there be any difference this time with only now those two as dancing partners, with no New Zealand first at all?
I definitely think the Green Party is going to try and ensure that it's a left-wing government. There are concerns that I've seen about a single Labour government will ensure that their policy isn't, necessarily being pushed from anywhere, because they have the majority. So if they weren't able to really hang on, the Greens could definitely act as a way of going, this is going to be a more left government than possibly what we would have seen if it was purely just Ardern.
Terrace?
Exactly. I think the same thing. Definitely not having to deal with New Zealand first could make a difference in terms of what happened with this previous government under Ardern, and one that maybe just, the Labour and the Greens. It definitely could be. I think it'll be tacked a little more to the left either way, just with Labour being able to rule by itself, just without having to have New Zealand first. But again, adding the Greens on does mean it will get tacked more to the left than Labour.
And speaking about the left, her usual favorite viewer, Arkelic, mentioned Arkelic. I apologize if I butchered it. The Greens have demanded a wealth tax. Ardern has said no to that, so that could be an interesting point of confrontation between the two if there is a coalition. If that wealth tax scenario comes back to in any negotiation. But who knows? But yeah, Labour may fall one or win the majority, and regardless of that result, Jacinda Ardern has done a very impressive election performance on her end, especially when it looked like earlier in the year that she was in trouble. And it looks like with COVID, she has bought herself another term and probably a much stronger position than she was before.
Yep. And just a final note that I would want to round this off with is that 50% or about 50% of voters have voted before the actual election day. Mm-hmm. So that's just a exciting little note. I think it's got to be one of the highest rates of early voting in the new COVID era that I've definitely seen. But that's just a little bit of an interesting thing. And I think on that note, we should also be going to another election that is going to be coming up next week, and we will be talking about, which is the Bolivia election. Now, this is going to be a very intense election, primarily because of the situation which caused the previous Bolivian president, Evo Morales, to, well, some call it a coup, some call it a democratic overthrowing, but he was ousted from power, and a more right-wing, right-wing senator was put in place as president. Now, that president has sort of done a botched job of the COVID-19 response, and ultimately, this new election, which is coming up, will see the left versus a more centrist candidate. And yeah, I just, Peter, do you want to go a bit more in depth on the situation there?
Well, yes. So with this election, depending who you ask, as Adam noted, you either are told that it was a CIA coup or it was the will of the Bolivian people at hand. Again, of course, folks, this is just, of course, if you, whatever persuasion you are. But yes, the main two contenders for this election are a more left-wing candidate who is the former Minister of Economy and Public Finances under the previous president, Evo Morales, and that is Luis Arce, currently ahead in the polls, but not by much. And his main challenger, for the most part, is Carlos Meseja, who is a former vice president and president of Bolivia, who served in the early 2000s, and he is much more of a center-right option. Depending, of course. No, actually, I recant that. Actually, he is actually a left-winger. Actually, I very much recant that. I see that I genuinely, because his classes didn't actually read the thing correct. He is actually of a more leftist period. Wait, am I reading this right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So just to jump in. Yeah. So the real way of looking at this is that the race used to be a bit bigger. You had a bunch of different candidates, such as the president, who was a bit more conservative. She dropped out. You have some other random sort of characters thrown in there. But yes, the main two are the left-wing Arce, I don't know how to pronounce it. Apologies. Who comes from the same party as Evo Morales, and the more centrist Carlos Mesa. And he, as Peter mentioned, was a former vice president, former president more specifically at the time when Evo Morales came to power. He was the one who led a very, poor government, which allowed him to rise. But yeah, polls are showing it being very tight between the two. It really bounces between who would win in a runoff. However, it definitely looks like the left-wing candidate is in the lead at the moment. And for them to actually avoid a runoff to a second round, which would happen in November, they would need to get 40% of the vote and be 10% higher than whoever is second. But yeah, the situation is incredibly polarized in the country, especially because of the situation of the government, who delayed the election in all the way back in, I believe it was May time and also September. So the amount of time they've had to wait since October, and a president who is appointed by the courts, is looking like this will be the first time for Bolivians to express themselves on how they're governed. And yeah, that's the broadest way of looking at it. But another element is that this time period has seen a lot of violence on the street because of the nature of which Evo Morales was taken out of power. People are very angry, and tens of people have actually died, and thousands have been injured in this situation. So whoever becomes president is going to have an incredibly complicated system to have to try and work around. But beyond that, there isn't much that I can think of besides those major points.
And I thank you for correcting me. This is what happens to people when you have three college classes in one day. Yes, and the current president, as noted by in the comments section, Ginny Anez is not running. She is very much unpopular and very controversial because of the role she played in removing Morales, who was the longtime president of Bolivia. Thoughts on the election, Terrace?
I mean, yeah, this is just, again, it's a competition in the first round to get that 40 plus the 10% difference. I'm not sure Luis Arce is going to reach that. It certainly looks like he's going to be elite in the first round. I think if it does go to a second round, it definitely is going to be an interesting thing. Again, polls have kind of been all over the place. I know I've been seeing some that have say Carlos Mesa leading in a second round runoff. But of course, those were from a little far back. So there really could be an interesting situation to see what happens.
And the last polling we do have on a runoff, and it should be noted that this was last on the 8th of October, would have Mesa beating Arcela by about 18. But that, again, is from October. It would be 50, 33. But again, that was in October, and we don't know necessarily how much of the error of margin of error or possibilities are for that. But yes, folks, it's going to be an interesting election. It's possible that Evo Morales, while he may not be running, may have his revenge in some way or form. And no, I am not left-wing Twitter.
Yeah, definitely. Twitter will react very wildly, depending on who wins, of course.
This will be
fun.
fun.
Yes, it's always fun. To other things of leaders leaving, and a story we were talking about last week on the show with me and Adam, and that is in Kyrgyzstan. And Adam can explain more of what has happened this week.
Okay, so everyone's favorite wild electoral story where nobody knows what's happening. Okay, so there's more to it. So last week I mentioned there was this former prisoner who had been freed during these initial protests after the election results on the 4th of October were basically contested because there was allegations of vote buying. He was freed, and he previously last week was running for prime minister again, and there was another candidate, a very complicated situation, but now he is the prime minister. So there's more to it. His name is Sadir Japarov, there we go. And he has also been one of the very vocal critics of the president there, who has called for him to resign. Now, the president has offered this resignation. And weirdly, he has offered his resignation in a time where he can't legally resign. He has to wait until the 17th of October to resign. So it furthermore just adds on to this complexity of a political situation, which doesn't really make much sense. Now, the key thing to look at is that even if the president does resign, he has an ally as the Speaker of House who will succeed him. So there is that element to look at it, that ultimately his loss will bring about somebody a bit newer to the scene who can maybe revitalize the role. But yes, it's the reason I find talking about Kyrgyzstan so interesting is because it is one of the few semi-functioning democracies in that region of the world. And more importantly, its political system is constantly undermined by a variety of different millionaires, of corruption, of this intense system where it doesn't seem very fair. But ultimately, the people of these countries constantly have political revolutions to try and overthrow this corrupt establishment, but the corrupt establishment keeps coming back. But yes, that is just the latest update to this continually developing situation, of which we really have still no idea what's actually happening behind the scenes. You're seeing, people being arrested because they're trying to flee the country, key political figures. You're also seeing appointments done by the Prime Minister being struck down, and others saying, oh, actually, it is allowed. So it's an incredibly complex situation, which is quite difficult to follow because of how much it keeps going back and forth. But make sure to continually watching The World Tonight to develop a slight understanding of what is going on in the semi-functioning democracy in Central Asia.
Terrace?
I mean, this just there's aspects of this that remind me of the Ukrainian Revolution in 2014, except with much more chaos, even with the chaos that had. So it's again, it's a crazy situation. Very much have to really read in between the lines what's actually going on, because what may be announced may not be what's going on behind the scenes for sure. So that's what I have on it.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think the story, as we've covered, has really taken some really odd turns. I didn't expect now that an ex-prisoner would become president of the country, but hey, there's always a first for everything in this year. And yeah, I mean, the whole swift moving of resignation of the current president and now an acting president, the PM, who is trying to effectively govern a country that is really at a stalemate. And as Adam mentioned, it's a semi-functioning democracies when the nearby countries are usually tin pot dictatorships, to put that a little nicely. But yeah, it's a very interesting story, and all of you who watch this show will know about this more often than the average person. But moving on, we're talking. Adam will explain an election in a neighboring country that didn't actually have any democracy involved in it.
Yes, so this is the previous. I mentioned this on the previous show as well. Tajikistan. Now, this is a country not known for its democracy. In fact, it has the same ruler since independence in 1992. So overall, the way of looking at this situation is that the president there, I'm trying to remember his name off the top of my head, but I cannot at the moment. The president's name,
Ramon.
that's the one, Ramon. He won the vote with 90.9% of the vote. A specifically, I guess, quite high, it could say, almost suspiciously high. Some others could say, but the real thing to look behind with this particular election is it's seeing some of the most intense human rights abuses happening during the actual previous campaign for it, and also post campaign. So we're seeing journalists being assaulted and arrested. We're seeing opposition candidates being pushed away and only pro-government candidates being allowed onto the ballot. And overall, being a situation where no actual opposition is really able to push themselves forward and challenge him. I mean, it probably wouldn't matter anyway if he was actually challenged, because ultimately the vote has always been rigged. There hasn't ever been an election in Tajikistan where any form of election rights, as an election observer has gone, this has been free and fair. So overall, it's a situation which is, an authoritarian state pretending to be a democracy, and there's not really much to add besides that his rule is, considerably put into question because of these kinds of things. But ultimately, the people in Tajikistan can't question it because they'll be arrested.
Indeed, yes. I think your points are right. I think also, the other thing with this is, again, really shows, I think, differences of two neighboring countries. We see previous to Kyrgyzstan, popular protest got a president thrown out, even in a semi-democracy. And in this one, we have a tin pot who is jailing people and is abusing its power. So it's really, the cruel essence of what humanity is in a sense with democracy. But yes, moving on to more protests. This is a subject that Adam mentioned, I think, a few weeks ago on this show, and that is the Thailand student protests. They have taken a very dramatic turn. Adam, explain a little bit of what's going on.
So these are more broad protests than just the student ones that had previously been going on weeks ago. But they're broad pro-democracy protests that are demanding reforms to Thailand's very powerful monarchy and calling for the resignation of the prime minister there, who was put into power by a coup. So they've been taking place in Bangkok, which is the capital city, and has been responded to by intense suppression by local authorities. 2 days, I think they started about 2 days ago. They've been continually going on, but the government has declared a state of emergency in the actual city and have put forward decrees banning gatherings. Now, protesters have defied these decrees, which have banned these gatherings of, I believe, more than 4 people. And in this situation, the police have responded by using water cannons, allegedly mixed with chemicals to make their eyes basically, I don't know, to itch them and whatever, irritate them. And it's just a continued case of people's voices in Thailand being suppressed. But beyond that, you're seeing tens of thousands going to the streets in various different cities. And quite interestingly, you're seeing the government commission polls to try and putting them into newspapers to try and show that people don't support these protests at all. And we've been covering these for Asia Election. It's been quite interesting delving into the specific questions they ask and the very strange wording they use. So, for example, rather than describing them as protesters or whatever, they use the word mob and try and use these polls to, I guess, show that the people are ultimately on the side of the government, maybe to dissuade others from going out onto the streets. But that's really the interesting note coming from Thailand. And they're not looking like they're going to slow down. They definitely do come in waves, really, protest there. But yes, it will be something we continue to look at because it's democracy in the world. That's what we're here to look for.
Terrace?
I mean, yeah, this is just continuing saga, it seems like, in Thailand. I mean, in terms of just what is democracy in Thailand, it doesn't seem like it's been there hasn't been a functioning one for a while. I still remember, of course, the coup in 2014 and the protests from that. So it's just been, again, this kind of continuing saga of, is Thailand going to become a full-fledged democracy or not? Who's to say?
Yes, and I think the point about Thailand is that Thailand, of course, has been for a very long time now a coup capital of Asia. Every time some government oversteps its mandate, depending on who you ask, the military gets in, and the current coup, led by Chan O-cha, who took over in 2014, has very much aligned himself as a leader, basically, with the monarchy's backing.
Something very rare to have in the country, where the monarchy usually tries to keep itself outside of politics. But it has been this is the real main reason why they're calling for reforms of the monarchy, is because they've really gotten into a relationship with the military.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And the monarchy, as we mentioned a few weeks ago on this show, the current leader of Thailand, the prime minister, has tried to run monarchs in local and for regional seats, which is a very, in a constitutional democracy, in how Thailand is supposed to operate as a democracy, that shouldn't be occurring. But obviously, the dictatorship wants to keep its image that it's supported by the monarch, and obviously, this dictator, of course, it should be noted, makes students at schools pledge allegiance to him, which is always, a fun, a joyful leader asking for allegiance from young children. But hey, that's a fun, free world we live in. But yeah, I think these protests, as Adam mentioned, come in waves. He's already tried. The government has tried to really crack down on these protests using very violent measures, but they seem to have, if anything, emboldened the protesters more than stopping them. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where this heads, especially in the regionalization of these things. What moves ahead, and it should be noted, obviously, Thailand is a very important country in Asia, and continuing protests will be of interest to see if they move the needle on anything. And these poll questions, as Adam mentioned, are always interesting to see a tin pot government decide to poll questions that show legitimacy, which is really, it seems to be a first.
Yeah, that's everything I have on the country. Is there anything else?
I don't know. I don't think we do. I think our next topic is to close on Thailand. It's also, the history of these coups are very fascinating, when and how they occurred. It's just, it's usually one little measure against the military, and like a wording always starts these things off. But moving on to Europe, Taras can explain to us some news in Slovakia involving a certain right-wing party. Very right-wing party.
Right wing is being generous to this party. This is the Slovak equivalent of the Golden Dawn, basically. Which, if you don't know, the Golden Dawn earlier this month were charged. Found, it wasn't just charged, but they were convicted of criminal organization charges, if I remember correctly. Well, something similar has happened in Slovakia. Marian Kotleba, who leads the far-right, almost neo-Nazi Kotlelovci People's Party or Slovakia, was found guilty of supporting sympathies towards oppressing other people's human rights. This is in relation to three checks he sent out to families in 2017 worth a very specific amount. I will not be repeating the amount just because of its connection to certain phrases and sentences, but the amount certainly was very clearly linked to certain pro-Nazi sympathies. To give some context about Marian Kotleba, he's a former governor of the Banska Bystrica province in Slovakia, which is in the southwestern part of the country. And he was very much anti-globalist. He had previously started a party that was shut down by the Slovak equivalent of the Supreme Court due to very explicit neo-Nazi ties. He's outstated support for the collaborative government during World War II. And so for him to be finally convicted just was seen as a victory for what could be described as the democratic parties in Slovakia. They're tired of dealing with him. They've wanted him gone for a while now. The only problem is even though, yes, he's been convicted of sympathies towards essentially Nazism, he has a chance to appeal still. The verdict is not final. It's going to be guaranteed he's going to appeal this. It's just the nature of the politician he is. He's not going down without a fight. So it certainly will be interesting, but I think it finally helps close a chapter in Slovakia's reconciliation almost with being in it, having the history of having been under a collaborative regime with Nazi Germany during World War II. So,
I have nothing to add really beyond the fact of what's been covered. It's been very interesting to see the ultimate downfall for a lot of these neo-Nazi parties who have been really, I guess it's just 2020 in some cruel way, but also has been the year of the pandemic and so forth, but has now been the year of banning neo-Nazis. So, there are ups and downs to this year. But yeah, that's all I have really add.
Yeah, and I think to go on Terrace's point, it's very interesting. What he mentioned and the history of that, and it should be noted that Slovakia had elections earlier this year, where this party got, I believe, what I'm looking at, 17 seats with about 8% of the vote. So it'll be interesting, obviously, if he is obviously officially convicted, what this would mean for his party and whatnot. But yeah, it's an interesting development in a country that's really, in the last few years, seen a lot of change as well, with its former, Prime Minister Fico, I think, Fico. Pizza, well, you always have to have the Slovakia.
Oh, don't worry, I'll have more on that later for Loser of the Week.
Having to resign because of a scandal involving a journalist being murdered. And it's just quite fascinating. And obviously the current, government itself in Slovakia is having its own COVID issues. So it's, quite a fascinating experience. And, the neo-Nazi parties being convicted left and right is quite a surprise, but it's pleasantly surprising and very good for Europe to rid itself of parties that are disgraceful. On that note, we move to another European issue, and that's everyone's favorite British issue, good old Brexit. Yes, people, Brexit's back. Today in the Brexit saga, Boris announced that the UK is preparing for no deal, and unless there is significant change, it's all up. Obviously, I'll go first to Adam.
Okay, so this has been a very interesting period of negotiations where, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we aren't all hyper paying attention to the very specifics of it. But ultimately, what we've seen developing is that the very issues that have existed for, I guess it's got to be months now, the key issues of state aid and fishing rights have really stuck around for this incredibly long time, and it's looking like neither side is really willing to budge or compromise. This is a very bad situation for the UK, primarily because of the fact that 50% of UK exports goes to the EU, and to have that cut off from them and to suddenly have to have tariffs applied to it. It's going to be a situation in which the economy is going to be hit incredibly hard because of COVID-19 as well, but also because of the tariffs related to it. But yeah, very much different from the 2019 Brexit message of a oven-ready deal and being able to get out quick, and this being the easiest possible thing to negotiate. But yeah.
Terrace?
It's times like this where I wish Spitting Image was still back.
Well, it is back.
It is back.
Oh, it is back.
Spitting Image is back. So
I can't wait to see their take on this. I can't wait to see how Have I Got News for You have their takes on this. For those of you who may not know, Spitting Image is a satirical puppet-based show famous for their satire in the 80s and 90s, particularly lampooning the governments of Margaret Thatcher, John Major, and even the royal family. And Have I Got News for You, if you're used to NPR, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me is based off of Have I Got News for You. It's a panel quiz show that involves a lot of comedic responses to the events of the week. So yeah, I mean, this is just the never-ending saga. It seems like we cannot get away from this issue. It's been, over 4 years since the referendum now. We're still not done with it. Watch us be here 1 year from now and still having to talk about this issue. That's how little hope I have for everything going on. Go ahead.
So yeah, just looking at this from the perspective of the EU, they're saying, Boris Johnson, please come talk to us. We need to keep negotiating over Brexit until the very last minute. Angela Merkel states that they will try to work out some form of compromise over issues of trade, security, fisheries, those kinds of things. But yes, it definitely seems like the EU is in some form of damage control situation where they're trying to cool temperatures on both sides, because it is an incredibly polarizing issue that has been seen by some leaders within the EU to be wasting EU time over an issue that really they feel like they should just get on with. Same with in Downing Street in the UK, they feel like this has been going on for far too long. Let's get on with it. And what we've seen so far is the EU have proposed a further 2 to 3 weeks of negotiations, but it seems like the UK will have to accept, or will have to see some form of major compromise from the EU for those to continue on. It's definitely looked like it's going to be stalling and will take quite a while to really get back on track.
Yeah, I think both points are very true. I think the other thing with this Brexit debate saga is that it's notorious that the EU does deals very late in these processes. Whether that's just how the EU likes to operate is an interesting saga. But I think the pushing towards no deal is a very concerning economic thing. In a sense, because of the already weakened economies of both players at hand, the UK and the EU, with the EU's economy having gone down with COVID, but so has the British economy, and it's just a great way of causing causing trouble in the economics interest. And this is obviously, of course, if there is no deal, the situation at the Irish border becomes even more of a relevant issue, especially if one Joe Biden becomes president of the United States. Downing Street may have a new problem in its hands, a very much an aggressive United States that pretty much will tell it, to quote President Obama's infamous words in London back in 2016, back of the queue. So it'll be interesting to see that. It'll also be interesting to see what lines happen, how economically the two sides decide to come to something, because even if there is no deal, there has to be some arrangement, sort of, to continue trading within some sense, which would be economic suicide not to have some sort of formal arrangement. But it will be interesting to see.
I guess something else to add to that too about U.S. influence. Probably was mentioned earlier on, like weeks ago, but Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the U.S. House, has said there will be no UK trade deal if the Good Friday Agreement isn't observed by the United Kingdom. And there's been concerns about what the effects of a no-deal Brexit would have on the Good Friday Agreement, and so on and so forth. So that's another effect to think about with the U.S. and no deal. So.
Specifically because in this situation where there is no deal, the previously talked about internal market bill, which had been brought into controversy for the potential of breaking international law, this would be a situation where it would be breaking international law because it comes into effect, therefore compromising the actual Good Friday Agreement, and then that plays into the fact of no US trade deal. So the UK is missing out on, I believe, about 70% of its export markets, because ultimately, or 70% of the export markets, which would be subject to tariffs. So yes, there is a lot of elements to this which show that in the coming weeks, significant compromise is going to have to be made between the two major parties.
Yeah, absolutely, because obviously in Britain's case, it may very well, the trade deal that they have said that they may come with the U.S. may not come. If current U.S. polling is correct, they will be having to deal with a completely new trade team in the U.S. come January, when it's almost certain Joe Biden will probably ask for a renegotiation again. And obviously Joe Biden has made no secret of the fact that if they do go ahead with their internal market bill, that would be a problem for them. And for Britain, obviously, especially for Boris Johnson, the worst possible thing for him, and it's been noted in British papers, is that Downing Street secretly really hopes that Trump wouldn't be able to pull it off, is because their relationships, they worry, with a Biden presidency would be very sour from the start.
Yeah, especially because Joe Biden seems certainly more inclined towards the EU, especially Ireland specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a good chance, you can jump in, any one of you two, that US-EU trade talks could resume again. And that would be a very devastating blow for Britain if the US and the EU basically started to come to terms and possibly even strike a deal within a Biden presidency.
The wonders of an Irish Catholic.
Yeah.
The Irish have always wanted it.
Yeah, that's the real long play since the 1800s. But I think another key element to look at it, to see this from, is that it really is observing the lack of power that Britain will play on the international stage once it gets out of the EU. Now, who knows how broken down EU relations, where both sides are hostile to one another, will affect something like the Iran nuclear agreement. I mean, just looking broadly out of this, the UK has been one of the major players with France and Germany trying to stick with them. But with the hostile words President Macron has been throwing, and potentially the more hostile feelings the countries will have towards one another, it may impact their relationship significantly, and that will, reduce their effectiveness on the international stage.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. It is. I think there has been a general consensus among European heads of states and governments in the European Union of tiredness with this issue. A good significant amount just say, get it done and over with. This is kind of ridiculous that we're still having these talks with people who don't want to compromise. In the eyes of certain EU leaders like Macron, or there are others who have tried to obviously continue this. But yeah, it will be interesting to see the relationship, and it will be interesting to see, especially if Britain has to deal with a United States that pretty much doesn't really have an interest for it anymore, because there have been rumors that a Biden administration is going to be much more focused with Germany and France. And that, of course, means probably that Britain's interests are not going to be held in a possible Biden administration.
And also, I think my final point this time is that this will, who knows how this situation will play off to Keir Starmer, who is the Labour leader in the UK, who's trying to sell himself as a competent, almost Blairite in some ways, new Labour, who will effectively be able to say, I am a competent leader. I don't want to, or didn't want this situation to spiral out of control and for the economy to crash because of a no-deal Brexit. It really does show off the weight that populist politics has really had on British politics, because all of these elements, I mean, even the rise of Trump, for example, are all playing into a situation which is really only reducing their influence on the international stage.
Yep, I think that's pretty fair. Though it is funny, of course, mentioning Keir Starmer, that his party did not whip at all against the internal market bill.
That is very true. But then again, I don't know. I feel like the internal strategy that the internal strategy there is attempting to sell himself as a leaver by backing, or at least not showing his disapproval of this bill.
Yeah, that's very possible as well. Who knows? It's a strange world that is British politics by the day. But moving on to our last segment, this is everyone's favorite, I'm sure, on the show. That is the loser of the week. So we'll first go to our friend in Iowa State, who hopefully their football team loses this weekend, to give his loser of the week.
Well, I'm going to do the first loser of the week, which is for you for forgetting that Iowa State has a bye weekend this weekend.
Well, rip. So hopefully you lose in 2 weeks then.
Oh, we're not losing to Oklahoma State. Just some context, Peter had been hoping my team would lose against Oklahoma, and well, that didn't happen, and I was very happy when that happened. So, but anyways, my loser of the week, we're going back to Slovakia. Igor Matovic, who's the prime minister of Slovakia, there's no other way to describe how he's handled the coronavirus but as a bumbling mess. And it's gotten to the point where his party is now second in the polls in terms of a most recent poll shows them behind Peter Pellegrini's new PLAD, Social Democracy Party. And so now the question would be who would form a government in that situation, because I can guarantee you Matovic and Pellegrini would not want to be in a government with each other. The rest of Slovakia, which would look like to be in the parliament in this, would not want to form a government with either Kotleba's group or your family, Boris Kolar's party, who is slightly to the left of Kotleba's party. And so it's just a big mess for Matovic. He's not looking good right now. Coronavirus certainly has changed a lot in terms of how he intended to govern, and it seems like he was ill-prepared to handle a public health crisis. So,
And it should be noted he also had a plagiarism scandal in June.
well, plagiarism scandals in Slovakia is like bread with toast. It's going to happen.
Actually, can I ask a quick question about Slovakia and one of the most interesting parties, I think, in the country,
Yes.
Freedom and Solidarity. What's causing their rise in the polls recently?
That's a good question. Who knows?
Okay, fair. Just to clarify to people, the reason I find it so interesting is because they're a libertarian party, or they're quite national liberalism, or however you want to call it. But they're just a very fascinating country to see in Eastern Europe, and they're on about, I think, 13% in the most recent poll. So I just wanted to know what's causing their rise.
Something interesting to note with them is they helped launch Matovic's party. So what's very common in Slovakia, you'll see happen sometimes, is multiple parties will kind of merge lists together, and sometimes it'll be labeled as a formal coalition, sometimes it wouldn't. That changes your threshold to reach into parliament. How Matovic first got into parliament was being on the Freedom and Solidarity list, I think back in 2010. And then he was able to finally just gain enough support by speaking in the parliament to finally go on, launch his own party. 2012, they're in the parliament, have been in the parliament ever since as their own standing party. And so that's how they've kind of worked. Yes, I do see the comment by Archangelic. Yeah, they're libertarians who happen to be in the ECR. Them being in the ECR kind of fits because they're fiscal libertarians. I'm not sure how much they are of social liberals. Social liberals in Slovakia is kind of a non-existent creature.
Well, they're for same-sex marriage, aren't they? And also decriminalization of cannabis, or at least I recall them being civil libertarians. Anyway, I feel like I've gotten this completely off track.
It's all right.
No, it's fine. Terrence, I'm sure, can answer that.
Yeah, I mean, if they aren't very outspoken about it. Again, because I mean, this is a very Catholic country, Eastern European Catholic country. They're part of the V4, the Visegrad 4, to kind of explain what that is like. That is Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and if I remember correctly, Austria. So to kind of,
I think it's Czechia, Hungary.
Oh yes,
Poland,
Czechia. And Austria is a kind of an observer member of this.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Interesting group of 4 Eastern European former Soviet bloc states. So always fun when you're in the Carpathians. Always fun.
Adam?
Okay, right. Yes, after that incredible tangent on a country that nobody seems to pay attention to, despite having a very fun political landscape, if I say so myself, I'm going to talk about Thailand a little bit more, and specifically a petition which nearly attracted 130,000 signatures on a petition site before it was blocked in the country to have the king removed. Basically, it was a petition against the king in English. I believe it was also in German, and it was in Thai. But yes, it was originated by a Thai graduate student in France. It was able to gain massive traction, as I said, 130,000 people. But ultimately, it broke some law in the country. So ultimately, it was blocked. But I just feel like it's quite amusing to have an online petition blocked by a quite authoritarian regime because people are unhappy. And it's just quite funny as well.
Always fun. My loser of the week is the former Mexican Defense Minister Salvador Cienfuegos, who was arrested at LAX on drug charges. Always fun when former Mexican leaders are getting arrested for helping the cartel smuggle money in. Great representation of proving that Mexico has full control over, its internal market. Gotta love, defense ministers who just, ironically, when he was still in his job, said he was going after the cartel hard. So I think it's quite, the loser of the week, the guy who claimed he was cartel to be, for 6 years the Minister of Defense, but in those 6 years really was just helping the drug lords out. Sounds like Mexican politics in a nutshell.
Can I add an honorable mention for this?
Sure.
Nikolai Sarkozy, who is just charged with yet more election funding charges, this time over the campaign, and accepting Libyan cash. This on the heels of he's about to go to trial over misfunding in his 2012 re-election campaign.
Oh.
Always fun when you're talking about Nikolai Sarkozy.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the fun thing was Sarkozy's private life, but it seems now his, ethics have kicked in. Who knew that? Yes. Nicholas Sarkozy. I gotta love his ethics.
It's always fun when you're a former French prime minister.
President.
But yes, I feel like we have from our resident person in the comments, Archangelic, saying that Taras has the best one, which I particularly am offended by because I thought a king being insulted. But, what are you going to do? Besides that, I think that's everything this week.
That's I think it's the wrap. Thank our resident scholar in the chat. I apologize for butchering your name. You may condemn me for the rest of your life if you see so. But no, it's always a pleasure to do this. Thank you for Taras for being able to make it. He nearly didn't make it because of a fire alarm.
We love freshmen and burnt toast. I mean...
And thank you to Adam, as always, a great co-host. And thank you to you viewers who watch this. And as always, please subscribe to Alexis Daily on YouTube, Twitter, or any other place. And also subscribe to the podcast. You can hear all our previous episodes on any episode or week you may have missed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast service you use. Again, thank you from Alexis Daily, from all of us. Have a good weekend. Stay safe. And have a great day. And thank you. Goodbye. And thank you for that spelling card, President Scholar.